Welcome to a Great Reads from Great Places presentation, a program of the affiliated Centers for the Book, coming to you virtually as a component of this year's Library of Congress National Book Festival. Hello, I'm Tracy Carr, Director of the Mississippi Center for the Book, one of 53 affiliates of the Library of Congress. The affiliated Centers for the Book help carry out the mission of the National Center, which is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy nationwide. We also promote our local literary heritage by putting a focus on books and authors with a connection to our states, commonwealths, districts, or territories. Every year, as part of our participation in the Library of Congress National Book Festival, each affiliated center chooses a book with a local connection that becomes a part of the Great Reads from Great Places initiative. The books are geared to young readers and become a wonderful national reading list each year. You can read more about the project and find the lists of previous year's books at the website read.gov. Today, we are featuring a group of Great Reads books which center on themes of migration and fitting in. These books were selected by directors of affiliated centers in Massachusetts, Ohio, Kentucky, New Mexico, and Mississippi, and we want to introduce the titles to you now. Mississippi chose Mildred D. Taylor's All the Days Past, All the Days to Come as our 2021 Great Reads book. The final installment in the Logan family saga, which includes the Newbery Award-winning Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, All the Days Past, All the Days to Come focuses on the Black family experience in 20th century America. From the Great Migration to the Civil Rights Movement, this book is ultimately about one young woman's search for her place in the world.
Hello. I'm Sharon Shalo, Executive Director of Massachusetts Center for the Book. Our 2021 Great Read selection is the picture book Dario and the Whale, written by Cheryl Lawton Malone. It's illustrated by Bistra Maseva, published by Albert Whitman and Company. Dario is a wonderful book about friendship and fitting in, which centers the perspective of seasonal residents of our Commonwealth. It tells the story of a young Brazilian boy who travels to Cape Cod with his mother, a summer employee in the tourism industry. While his mother works, Dario tries to fit in with peers, but has some trouble bridging gaps in language and culture. His loneliness is dispelled by a developing friendship with a young right whale who needs only waving and splashing to make a connection. When the time comes for the young whale to continue its migration north, Dario conquers his sadness with hopeful anticipation of the whale's return, along with his own, the following year.
Hello, I'm Don Boozer. I am the coordinator of the Ohio Center for the Book, based at Cleveland Public Library. Ohio's 2021 Great Reads from Great Places selection was Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga. Other Words for Home tells the story of a young girl named Jude growing up in Syria with her family and friends. But Jude's world is turned upside down whenever it's decided that she and her pregnant mother have to move halfway across the world to Cincinnati, Ohio to live with her uncle's family. Other Words for Home was the award-winning debut novel of Jasmine Warga, who herself was born in and grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Hi, I'm Sarah Woods, Director of the Kentucky Book Festival and Coordinator of the Kentucky Center for the Book. Kentucky's 2021 Great Reads from Great Places selection is Together We Grow by Susan Vaught. Together We Grow, Susan's debut picture book, received 4-star reviews and is a poignant story that celebrates inclusivity, acceptance, and the importance of rebuilding a community in the wake of disaster. An award-winning author of books for middle graders, Susan works as a neuropsychologist at a state psychiatric facility and lives on a farm with her wife and son in rural Western Kentucky.
Hello, I'm Lori Smith Thornton, the coordinator of the New Mexico Center for the Book. Our Great Reads from Great Places selection this year is The Crossroads by Alexandra Diaz, which is the sequel to The Only Road. It received a Pura Belpré honor, the America's Award for Children and Young Adult Literature, and the American Library Association Notable Children's Book Award. Alexandra is the daughter of Cuban refugees, and she lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. School Library Journal, in a starred review, described both of these books as important, must-have additions to the growing body of literature with immigrant themes.
We are delighted that 4 of the Great Reads authors are able to join us today to discuss their work. From Massachusetts, I want to introduce Cheryl Lawton Malone, author of Dario and the Whale. Representing Ohio is Jasmine Warga, author of Other Words for Home. Joining us from Kentucky is Susan Vaught, author of Together We Grow. And from New Mexico, we welcome Alexandra Diaz, author of The Crossroads. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being with us today. I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleagues to get our discussion going.
Okay, to get this discussion going, the National Book Festival's theme this year is Open a Book, Open the World. And we would like to start a discussion with having you discuss or talk about how you see or what worlds you hoped to open up for your readers of your books.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's just a delight, an absolute delight to be here. When I wrote Dario and the Whale, I was thinking about, I actually had the experience that, similar to something to Dario, in that I was on a beach on Cape Cod and walking with my dog, and I happened to hit the timing where the right whales were migrating through our waters, and literally a right whale surfaced maybe 20 feet offshore of this very steep Race Point beach. But at the time I wrote the book, I didn't really think about opening worlds so much as just trying to capture the magnificence of meeting a whale. But since then, and in edits and looking back, I can see that what I also wanted to capture was this idea of families that work, mothers that work, fathers that work, people that work for, because they have to work. And then the children of those families and how they fit in and moving from place to place. And so opening a child's eyes to the fact that not everyone lives in a house, not everyone goes to school at the same school every year or all year. That was one of the worlds that I was trying to open up.
Oh, that's great. I think that those are important things to open up. Susan, would you like to tell what kind of world you wanted to open up for your readers?
Sure. I wanted to look at what happens when somebody is forced out of their comfort zone, forced out of where they live by a disaster, by something that they cannot control, and the risk that that person takes, or that animal in this case takes, and the risk that the community takes in accepting that person, and the real need to give everyone in the situation a chance, and to accept each other, and to look at the vibrance of the community that can be developed with the diversity of creatures, humans, animals that can live in a single space, and how they can blend together. Also, because I live on a farm and live in the woods on a farm, I liked bringing in those animals. I think Kelly Murphy did an awesome job illustrating animals that I want to have one of all of the things in the book, at least. So.
That's great. And Alexandra?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra Diaz, the author of The Crossroads. And as it was mentioned, this book is a sequel to a modern day immigration story. So we often hear about what goes on with children in particular, because we're children's book authors, what goes on with children when they immigrate to the US. But we don't often hear about what happens to them now that they are here. How are they living their life? How are they integrating or not integrating into their new environment? So with The Crossroads, I really wanted to share a story that happens a lot here in New Mexico, but also in other parts of the United States, where a child is suddenly thrown into multiple situations that they don't understand, that they don't know how to handle, there's this illusion that coming to the US is like this great utopia. But what if the utopia isn't as great as was promised? So that is something I definitely wanted to share. And I wanted to provide a book that offers a mirror for the children who have experienced this, especially if they have traveled to the US unaccompanied, which is something that has been happening a lot, but also as a window to show readers who have no idea that this is happening, what it is like for their classmates, their their neighbors, people, members of their church, of their community. So this is something that is going on through all over the United States, not just in New Mexico. And I really wanted to have a book that allows people to get an idea of what this situation is like.
Oh, that's great. And representing Ohio, Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. And what a beautiful question and beautiful theme. I've loved getting to listen to everyone else's responses. And my response is a little bit similar to Alexandra's, in that I really wanted to explore the immigrant experience and identity formation that comes from that, particularly for the Middle Eastern community, the Arab community, and the Muslim community, where oftentimes that identity, especially for young people, is made to feel very fraught because there's all this messaging that makes it seem like your Muslimness is in conflict with your Americanness. And I think this is in part because of the global political situation with the US's ongoing entanglements in the Middle East, but oftentimes Middle Eastern and Muslim children only ever see themselves portrayed as the enemy, as the people of which we are at war with. And I wanted to dig into those nuances and also show that a lot of the children, like Jude in the book, are fleeing from religious fundamentalism or totalitarianism, but that isn't an indictment of an entire religion. And I think that sometimes that nuance is often lost in our conversations about the Middle East. And so I wanted to show a young girl who's really proud of her culture and is proud of her religion and her faith, while also showing the joy that she has about the opportunities she's going to get to have in America, and how all of those things can exist in one story. So kind of complicating hyphenated identities was something I was really interested in exploring.
That's great. Those are all great answers. Does anyone have any other thoughts on any of the other authors' thoughts there?
I just wanted to add to what Jasmine was saying, that yeah, I think it's really important for readers to know that the protagonist doesn't need to lose their identity just because they are here from a different country and they are from a different culture. We call the United States a melting pot, and in many ways it is, but it is also an opportunity to share and explore with others your heritage, your culture, your background. And I think it's important for kids to know that they don't have to become just like everyone else, that they are valued and even encouraged to be who they are, and part of who they are is where they've come from and their religious beliefs and things like that.
That's a very good point. All right. All right. I believe then we will go on to question number 2.
Okay, so books for young readers span the ages from picture books for our youngest readers to longer works for middle graders and young adults. They can work in fiction, nonfiction, and verse forms as well. Would each of you talk about why the form you chose fit the story you wanted to tell the readers you imagined for it? And I want to start with Jasmine here, and then we'll go to Susan, Alexandra, and Cheryl.
Yeah, so Other Words for Home is a novel in verse. And if anyone is not familiar with that, what that means, it just means that every chapter is a standalone free verse poem, and all of the poems work together to tell the whole narrative. And Other Words for Home actually was not originally a novel in verse, which now is kind of funny to talk about, since I now cannot imagine it not being a novel in verse. But when I first started, it was just a prose novel, and I was really having difficulty finding Jude's voice. And then I sort of had this light bulb moment that perhaps if I broke the book out into verse, her voice would be more of the star. And that's what I really wanted, because I think verse is a form that works very well for the book, because I really wanted to exalt Jude's voice. I wanted it to be the star of the book. I think so often kids like Jude are not given a voice. They're not allowed to tell their story and be the star of the story. And then also, verse was a form in which I could capture some of the cadence and lyricality of Arabic that isn't easy to translate into a book that's in English, right? There's a suspension of disbelief that I'm asking of the reader to read this book that is in English, being told to you by a girl who clearly would be speaking to you in Arabic. And so I felt like verse was the best format to capture, like I said, some of that cadence and texture that is so special about Arabic and that I love about Arabic. And I felt like kind of brought her voice to life in that extra way. So I sort of backed my way into the book being in verse. I wrote it the wrong way first, which is oftentimes what happens with my forms, but I'm excited to hear how everyone else settled on the form for their book as well.
Backing into it is a great description for me, because when I first conceptualized this book, I didn't conceptualize it with words at all. I have a bird farm, and both farms I've had have been out in the middle of nowhere. And if you've not had a farm, you don't realize it, but animals sort of add themselves to your farm on their own when you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you get, a lame raccoon shows up, or, somebody's chicken that you don't know where it came from, or definitely cats. Cats always add themselves into the mix. And the more that, we even have had wild chickens show up from other people's farms. And so I wanted to conceptualize a farm where it could just grow with what showed up, with what needed a home, with what wanted to be in that place. And so I was then heartbroken when my editor informed me that people who cannot draw beyond stick figures usually do not do nonverbal picture books, that's a really difficult thing to do. And so she suggested that I go back and try words. And so then I tried signs for a while, and finally I ended up backing into using the first thing that I ever wrote, which was rhyming poetry, back in my early years, because I was trying to capture just raw emotion. Most of the scenes and the verses in the book have to do with the emotion from, fear when the original home is destroyed, to the trepidation of approaching new people and their concern and anxiety, and then the hopefulness of beginning to get to know each other and work together. And so I tried to keep it very sparse, very rhythmic, and just very focused on exactly what was happening in the moment. So that's how I wound up with the verse, and the realization, if I ever want to do nonverbal picture books, the first thing I have to do is learn to draw. So I'm probably going to stick with words.
Well, I really admire those of you who are able to write in verse, because that is not something that I have a talent in, nor do I have a talent in illustrations. So again, admire those of you who do those. For me, it was a very natural choice to go with fiction prose, because that's what I read and that's what I feel most comfortable writing. I often see my books as a movie, so the words, the narrative kind of come out very easily for me, and especially dialogue. So oftentimes when I'm writing my book, I will have just dialogue, and then I will go back in there and say, okay, well, what are they doing? What is the subtext? What is happening around the dialogue? again, because I'm a visual person, I'm seeing it as a movie, and it's the format that just works so well for me. But I would love to have more diversity in my format, because I would definitely see the advantage of suddenly deciding, oh, this should be a prose novel. It's like, wow, I so really admire you two for being able to do that.
Well, I wrote Dario as a picture book, and it never occurred to me to write it in any other format. I love picture books. I love how poetic they are. I love how sparse they are. I love the fact that you can tell a story, layers and layers of a story with few words. And it's really, I think Susan might have said, just or somebody said that capturing the emotion in few words, and then letting the reader just feel the story. And picture books are set up because half the story is told in pictures and half in words, and it's set up that way. So just never occurred to me. The other thing I love about picture books is and it lent itself to this story because it's a parallel story. It's a story about Dario, but it's also a story about a whale who's going through, in its own non-anthropomorphic way, a similar journey, a journey north to find food, a journey north to find sustenance and friends. So the physical layout of a picture book lends itself to that. So that was why I picked that.
Thank you all so much. I do want to say writing a novel in verse sounds, especially walking back into that after writing the whole novel, sounds so difficult, but it's a trend that I've seen a lot in young adult literature that is growing and growing and growing. And I think it ties into music too, right? And the love of music. So thank you all so much for sharing that with us. I'll turn it over to Lori for question 3.
These past 18 months have been extraordinary, challenging our sense of control over our world. What role do you think books play in helping people cope with the challenges to the way we live now? And are there particular books you would recommend for these times? Let's begin with Susan from Kentucky.
I think COVID-19 has turned us all into, in a way, immigrants in our own environment, because we've had to put down everything we found familiar, everything we found comforting, and remake it quickly, not by choice, into something that works for us and the people around us. So I feel like all the books picked in this particular talk are very addressed to the situation that we're in, where you have to go and find a new way of being and doing, while still retaining those things about yourself that are most valuable and most important. Of course, I work in healthcare, so my perspective is a little slanted at the moment, because it's been a pretty difficult road all along. But I do think that music, art, literature, books, I think that people, especially during the lockdown period, began to realize that art isn't just a frill off to the side, that art is its own life, art is its own therapy, art is its own comfort, whether it be picture book or singing together with 600 people you've never met on songs about a whale. Even that was one of the big trends, was the Wellerman TikTok, where they were singing about a right whale. So I keep thinking about that whenever she brings up the whale. But it was a way of connecting. I think that these are all connections. They're like little synapses that we all share, that we can connect through if we're willing to do that. So I think that what people turn to, or what might be the best for them, whether it be picture books or novels, has to be the thing that speaks to them, has to be the thing that makes their heart happy and makes their heart sing in a time when the fear, I think about the fear in my animals when they're running out of their burrow, or when they're trying to get to know each other, to feel like it's all okay to be in the barn together. To get past that, you have to find the thing that is magic for you, and the format that's magic for you. So I think I also just am impressed with any author that finished a book during this period of time. I'd like to send them all flowers if I had lots of money, I would, because I don't know how they did that. I've not been able to pull that off. But I think bless them that they did that. Bless the people that got the movies out, that sang on the internet and sang on TikTok and gave us all something to hope for, to believe in. So I'm excited that I think this panel is particularly well suited to what people have gone through in the pandemics.
Alexandra?
So for me, books have always been a way to experience things that I myself wouldn't have been able to experience. And during the pandemic, where a lot of us found ourselves locked in or restricted in terms of what we were allowed to do or where we were allowed to go, friends we were allowed to meet, books, I feel more than ever have helped children and adults be able to connect with the outside world and be able to have experiences that they would have never had. So for example, befriending a whale or being a member in a community and making new friends, even though you speak a different language or a different religion, or having your animal friends doing a adventure. So all of that, all of our books, I feel are great examples of things that you can escape to, that you can appreciate. And that pandemic has definitely needed an escape mechanism, especially if you're stuck in your house the whole day long and you are not interacting with friends. Characters in the books can now suddenly become your friends and you're excited to see what's going to happen. You're drawn into that suspense. So I'm so thankful for our libraries that, you know, even though a lot of them closed down, they did so much to make books accessible for kids, even if their buildings were physically closed. I know libraries that offered like even a concierge service that would just give you a stack of books. And then also audiobooks. That was a great way to listen to stories that you may not have necessarily been drawn to initially, but because they were there, they were online, they were accessible, and you could play it while you were doing other stuff around the house. I mean, I think that was just really good that we had these resources and we had these huge diverse books that essentially appeal for everyone.
Cheryl?
Yeah, I think that, you know, during the quarantine, you know, so many parents are home with their kids and looking for things to do. And a book is a handy, easy way to, you know, bring in new experiences, new friends. But more than that, even what I love is the idea that books can provide at least a stepping stone to the wonder and the imagination and the creativity that may have been prompted by other things that are now lacking. So like, you know, things at school or friends or trips that families would have taken to look at the stars, to go camping, to go to magnificent places, or even just to visit family. Books can provide that same sort of opportunity for wonder and joy and heart. So that's what I think. I just love the opportunity to get more books into homes and to just have more people looking at books and more kids reading. It's just a great opportunity.
And Jasmine?
Yeah, I agree with so much of what's been said, that books are the best vehicles to expand wonder, to expand hearts, to comfort. I guess I'll speak to my personal experience through the pandemic. I have 2 young daughters, and I have sort of rediscovered the joy of the read aloud and how sort of comforting it is to process a story in oral form. And we have loved so many different stories. You know, we've been making our way through the Ivy and Beam books, and they're loving the humor in those books. They cried while reading, you know, the one and only Ivan, and we've read tons and tons and tons of beautiful picture books. But I think it's what everyone's saying, you know, books have always been an amazing portal to worlds outside of our own. And I think that in a time when a lot of us are feeling really isolated, it's really wonderful to have those portals, but to also have the magic that books have of sort of growing hearts. I think that this is a time when we need more kindness and more empathy, and especially for our young people to have a sense of community and a sense of responsibility to their community. And I think books can really help to build that in our young people. And that's what I love. And I feel so grateful to all of the library workers who made it possible for young people to still have access to books even when the world was closed down. And on a personal level, one of the things that brought me the biggest joy during the pandemic was going around with a little bag of books and putting them in all the little free libraries in our community, and just having that feeling of being able to share a book, even though we were all distanced from one another.
Yeah, I think I've read more books in the past 18 months or listened. As Alexandra said, I do a lot of audiobooks as well. So I'm thankful to all of you for keeping the books flowing. Any other last thoughts? Or any book recommendations?
I was really grateful that publishers suspended a lot of their concern about sharing of materials, so that there was more just overall ability for all children to have access to all books. I mean, there was a magic moment in time there where proprietary rights and money and everything became less important, and the word and the art became ascendant. And I just loved that for that brief moment in history.
Yes, it was amazing. Something I thought I'd never see.
Hi, this is Sharon. I've really been enjoying this conversation, and I did have one question I wanted to ask, but before we do that, I couldn't help but think about a project that many centers sponsor on our home turf called Letters About Literature, where we ask young people to write letters to authors about books that have been important to them. And as you were talking about your books, I was thinking about the kinds of responses that students would be having. And, one of the things that students very much like is finding somebody like them and sharing that experience. And so I think it's so good to offer that diversity and to give people a way in. The other thing they like to do is find similarities in differences, and to say, well, that's just like what I do here. And in each of those ways, being, secure that one's identity is not strange in the world, or finding similarities across those apparent differences. I think all of you are writing the kind of books that our students love to respond to. And one of the things that they very much like to do is continue the book and say what will happen next. And so I couldn't help but start to think about, well, what would be the next chapter they would write? And I know that, for instance, in Cheryl's book, I'm sure that students would want to talk about what happened next summer and how big would the whale be? They'd be very, and I wonder if you've ever thought about that, like what comes next in your book, and what students might be adding, because they very, very much like to do that.
Just in terms of Dario, I get that question all the time. And then I usually ask the students, what do you think happened next? And I get everything from, well, the whale comes back with his family, and Dario has lots of friends, and then his mom is, working still, but he's, he goes to school with the kids. So they really do integrate the story into their own lives. And pretty soon he has a brother named, whatever the child's brother's name is. And it's really delightful. It's absolutely delightful. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to talk through a story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I love getting the responses from readers. I mean, you must love that when you're out, when you're finally able to meet your readers again and seeing that enthusiasm and excitement.
Absolutely.
So what are your readers going to be getting next from you. Can you talk a little bit about the projects you're working on? And how about if we put you on the spot, Alexandra? Can I start with you to find out what your next project is?
So I just want to throw out there that I have a book out that already called Santiago's Road Home, and a clever reader may perhaps, possibly find out some information about characters from the Crossroads in that book, but I don't know, I could totally be making that up. So just throwing that out there in case, perhaps they were interested. What I have actually been working on right now is a very loosely based historical fiction novel on what my parents went through when they immigrated from Cuba in 1960s. So for those of you who are aware, 1960s was a long time ago. Dinosaurs were dead, but the woolly mammoths were still romping the earth. And it was just a very different world. There was a lot of things going on in 1960s, especially in Miami, which is where my book takes place. So I've had to change a lot of the aspects from my parents' immigration story, because for one thing, my parents were on the older side when they immigrated, and my publisher wanted me to write for middle school age kids. So there has been quite a lot of changing, but still I'm trying to keep it true to at least the culture, the thoughts, the mentalities of what people were experiencing in 1960, which is very different than what is going on currently right now with immigration. So that is my project at the moment. It's set to come out next summer, but I don't know if that is still the case since I've given it to my editor and I haven't heard any feedback yet. So we'll see whether that date gets pushed or not.
Sounds great. What about you, Cheryl?
I have a middle grade novel that I'm still working on, which is set 10,000 years in the future, and set here on Earth, and a snowy Earth that has suffered a catastrophe and is completely snowbound. And it's a place where there's a feudal system, and the haves and the have-nots, and the kids have a quest to figure things out, to right the wrongs of the past. So that's it's a time when it's illegal to believe in stars. So that's so a little different than my picture books, but it is a lot of fun to work on. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, it's timely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Jasmine, can you tell us what you're working on?
Yeah, so I have a new middle grade novel coming out next fall. Is titled A Rover Named Resilience, and it is about a Mars rover. It's actually narrated in first person from the rover, and it follows Resilience, is the name of the rover, though he's affectionately called Res. His journey from being created in the JPL lab at NASA to his journey to Mars and his relationship with the other robotic creatures, because this new rover that's on Mars now, Perseverance, is the first rover that is accompanied by a drone helicopter, and that's also a character in the book. It's definitely my pandemic book, and that it's very different from anything that I've ever worked on before. And I think that it's because like my brain, my imagination got really shook up from this experience. And in July of 2020, when the new rover was launching into space, I set up to watch the launch with my daughters, because my youngest daughter, who was 3 at the time, was really into space. And she turns to me and goes, "Mommy, do you think the robot is afraid?" And right there, I saw the book and I couldn't stop wondering about that. And then I did more and more research into the rovers, and have just become like fascinated by the engineering and exploration, and it's been such a joy to work on. So we're kind of calling it like the one and only Ivan, but with robots is kind of the vibe of the book. It's really sparsely told also. So it's not completely verse like Other Words for Home, but it's really like short, sparse chapters because it's a robot who's telling the story. So yeah, that'll be out exactly a year from now. So.
Wow, I mean, that sounds fascinating, and you're right, such a difference. Yeah, I like that variety very much. Susan, what are you working on?
Well, we've talked about what happens next, and I think my next book is actually what happens next. And the announcement is going to be today or tomorrow, but Kelly Murphy agreed to illustrate a second book, picture book, and it's called Tomorrow We Build. And it's, basically one of the things when you look at, especially the cover of Together We Grow, is a lot of animals into the space. And so one of the things that happens after any sort of disaster or after any sort of large immigration event is you redesign. You have to build your community. You have to start from somewhere and get bigger tables, for people to come together. And so that's what that book is about. And I'm excited to see where she takes it with her thinking on the illustration. And I'm also working on a middle grade mystery that's set in partially, at least, in an old psychiatric hospital. My characters, in whether they be middle grade or young adult, tend to have various mental health issues, and also more recently, more true to kind of my own experience, some autistic flavor to them. And so my characters in this middle grade mystery right now it's called Finding What's Mine. They're participating in a group therapy to learn something called the skill system, which helps people regulate their emotions a little bit better as an actual therapeutic system out in the world. But they then take it and operationalize it in their life, and they hang out in this old psych hospital that is shut down in order to get away from bullies. And the psych hospital is sold, and so they pack up their things to go home, but apparently they packed up something that they shouldn't, because they start getting letters from somebody who wants it back. And so they have to solve that mystery, even through all the challenges they're facing and losing their safe haven.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. We can't wait to read all of these books, and we thank you all for joining us today. We were honored to have you, and we're really excited to be sharing not only the works that we selected, but giving readers a heads up about what's coming next from all of you. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all.
And thanks also to our viewers for joining this Great Reads from Great Places presentation. All of us in the affiliated Centers for the Book send best wishes for great reading. Please return to the National Book Festival site, and especially to the Festival Near You section, to see other Great Reads 2021 author panels, as well as to participate in a variety of national and local events to celebrate reading and writing throughout our nation.